Thank you very much, Dina, and hello, everyone. Welcome to the panel on gender transformative approaches to environmental protection, women, girls in the ocean. And as we know, it's in the context of the third annual online summer-winter school on environmental and human rights, which is organized by the Global Network for Human Rights in the Environment and the United Nations Environment Programme. I'm going to start by thanking Dina and through you, all the organizers, for inviting me to chair this panel. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Valentina Germani. I'm a senior legal officer at the Division for Ocean Affairs and the Law of the Sea of the United Nations Office of Legal Affairs. I'm very pleased to be with you today to chair this panel, and I really hope that the presentations and the discussions that we will have after will help us to understand much better the need for the protection of the human rights of women and girls, of course, in the context of the climate-ocean nexus. But I also hope that we will explore the necessity to empower girls, women in the law of the sea, marine sciences, and ocean management. And this was a little bit the objective of this panel. My experience is centered on the work of the United Nations in relations to ocean affairs and the law of the sea. I also worked at the UN Climate Change Secretariat, and I have to admit that until recently, in my work, my experience was that the law of the sea in particular and the ocean governance discourse at the global level were somewhat ignoring the contributions of women and girls in these fields, and also the need to protect their rights and support their participation. We have a constitution of the oceans, which I have to mention because we are the secretariat of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provides really the legal framework for all activities in the oceans and seas. And it contains no mention to women, girls, or even more generally, gender. Of course, we have to keep in mind that this convention is the product of its time. It was negotiated in the 1970s and early 80s, but also many of the subsequent agreements, international agreements and treaties that complement UNCLOS. I'm going to use the acronym UNCLOS if you allow me. So also these complementary agreements and treaties include no mention to gender aspects or the recognition of the role of women in ocean sectors. For example, we know the important role in small-scale fishery. And there are also no requirements for the participation of women in decision-making mechanisms. This, fortunately, seems to be changing now. And for example, the latest UNCLOS implementing agreement, which was just recently adopted and will be open for signature in, well, 1 week exactly. That agreement is on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, and it contains several references to the need to ensure gender balance and the participation of women. So, for example, the agreement provides that capacity building and the transfer of marine technology should, amongst other things, it's a longer list, but they should be gender responsive. And the agreement also requires that all mechanisms established under the agreement, so for example, all the various subsidiary bodies and committees, must be gender balanced. And this is a welcome development, as a number of the mechanisms established under UNCLOS, in fact, are still struggling to achieve gender balance. Another example I wanted to show with you, again, at the global level, which is what I'm more familiar with, is the outcome of last year's United Nations Ocean Conference on the implementation of SDG 14. This was held in Lisbon, in Portugal, which includes a commitment to empower women and girls as their full, equal, and meaningful participation is key in progressing towards a sustainable ocean-based economy to achieving Goal 14. So again, a recognition in a global ocean policy instruments about the need to empower women and girls and the recognition of their role towards sustainable ocean development. But beyond the legal and policy framework focusing on the oceans, we cannot omit to mention the work on women, girls, and the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment in the human rights context, and in particular, the report of the Special Rapporteur on the issue of human rights obligations relating to the enjoyment of a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And this report really highlights that the triple planetary crisis, and we know that's climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, combined with systemic gender-based discrimination and inequality, is imposing disproportionate harms on women and girls, threatening in particular to violate their human rights. It's also something that I want to mention is that in the same line, the UN General Assembly in 2022 passed a revolution, no, well, it was a little bit of a revolution, but it was a resolution, a resolution declaring that everyone on the planet has a right to a healthy environment. And so these are important steps, I think, at the global level that exactly not only recognize human rights to a healthy environment, but then also recognizing the role, the very important role and rights of women and girls. So I think there is some progress here to be celebrated, at least in a small part. And I really believe that this progress is possible because the voice of all stakeholders, including the local communities, and within those communities, the most vulnerable group, such as women and girls, so their voices are increasingly being heard in global fora. It's probably never enough or not yet enough, but at least it's a start. Unfortunately, often the reason for this is that these groups are in fact the most vulnerable to today global challenges, like, for example, the impact of climate change on coastal and local communities. But this is not the only reason. It's also important to remember that factors are the growing recognition of the role of women and girls in ocean sectors and the need to protect their rights, together with an understanding of the importance that traditional and local knowledge have and as an essential and valuable source of knowledge for the sustainable use and conservation of ocean resources. And of course, the work done by researchers such as our panelists today is most certainly contributing to this progress. So I will now move on to present and welcome and present our panelists and allow them to proceed with their presentations. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Georgina Oduro. Georgina is an associate professor of sociology at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology of the University of Cape Coast in Ghana. And today she will talk to us about cultural and gender dimension of climate change, resilience, and vulnerable coastal communities in Ghana. We will then hear from Dr. Pilile Bata. And Pilile is teaching and doing research excuse me, within the fields of environmental sustainability and human geography at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And she will talk to us about equality and equity in livelihoods in South Africa and the gender context. Following, we will hear from Dr. Bukle Francis. She is a scholar and activist based in South Africa at Rhodes University at the Environmental Learning Research Center in the One Ocean Hub project, which is led by Strathclyde University in the United Kingdom. And Bukle will talk to us about Grandmothers of the Sea, protecting women's rights through art and fair benefit sharing from seaweed harvesting in the face of climate change. And then Ms. Martha Jonas, who is a coordinator for continuous professional development and also short courses at the University of Namibia. She is also an early career researcher on the UN Ocean Hub in Namibia under the transformative Gender for a Sustainable and Innovative Blue Society. And Marta will talk to us about the potential of social capital as a transformative strategy for the climate change adaptation, a case study on Namibian coastal women. So allow me to thank all of our presenters for being here with us today. And I should not finish my introduction without thanking the One Ocean Hub for, in particular, inviting me here today and for supporting our preparation. So having said all of that, please, Georgina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Valentina, for the opportunity. So I'll now share my slides and then start the presentation. Yes, thank you. Where is this one? Okay. Great. I wanted to be sure. So good afternoon once again from Ghana. It's quite sunny this afternoon and it's a bit warm. And maybe depending on your context, I will say good morning and then good evening to colleagues from other parts of the world. And I'm part of the One Ocean Hub research project in the Ghanaian context. And in Ghana, I'm part of the RP5, which is about the blue economy. So this presentation forms part of the One Ocean Hub research project that we have been having in Ghana. And I'm looking at cultural and gender dimension of climate change vulnerabilities in coastal communities in Ghana. I start by looking first at a bit of background and context, then I come out with research questions. Theoretical framework, I'll not dwell much on it because of time. Theoretical framework and methodology, I will skip it a bit and come to the findings and implications, and then to the conclusion. So on the screen is the Ghana map. Ghana is definitely part of Africa, and we are here in West Africa specifically. So on the Ghanaian coast, there are 4 regions that are on the coast. Here we have Western, Central, Greater Accra, and Volta region. And the presentation I'm making is from the Central and Volta regions of Ghana, which are the part of the 4 coastal ranges in the country. And we have the Atlantic Ocean and also the Gulf of Guinea in the Ghanaian context. So I start by arguing that we've all known the benefits of the ocean to humanity in terms of livelihood, which is globally acknowledged. So definitely the ocean gives us our livelihood, as we can see from the picture on the screen, a huge fish being displayed by one of the sellers in the country. It gives us food and nutrition. And our statistics show that about, in Ghana, we consume more fish than actually meat because of the coast, we produce more of that. And then it's also, the ocean gives us income in terms of those in the coastal areas and who rely on the income. About 10% of Ghana's population of 30 million depend on the ocean. It gives us employment as well. It also has huge cultural values, both tangible and intangible cultural values, because we associate with the ocean. It gives us identity. It gives us all that. So that is it. And the fisheries sector in Ghana, for example, contribute to 4.5% of our GDP. And it's a very important source of income and nutrition, just as it happens in other parts of the world. So that's how I start my background. When it comes to climate change, we know that climate change is not experienced equally by all nations or all people. And the literature says that in Africa, we are more vulnerable because of existing inequalities. Already there exist inequalities on the continent. So climate change is impacting more. And the literature shows that though through gas emission and coal, and Africa is not contributing that much to climate change. Unfortunately, it bears a lot when it comes to the burdens of climate change. When it comes to fisheries, women contribute a lot. Approximately 21% of women globally are within the fisheries sector. In the Ghanaian context, we are more into processing and distribution because fishing per se is a male domain. But when it comes to the distribution and then the processing, here is we find women dominating. African women are more vulnerable to climate change since they are more reliant on natural environment. Whilst my presentation look at the ocean, when we look at climate change generally, we look at women when it comes to those who are into agriculture, farming specifically, realize that they are quite impacted because they are also the first agents of socialization. Because when a child wants food, the tendency is that the child will ask the mother first before going to the father. So when it comes to climate change impact, women are comparatively affected. They are into water gathering, they are into land, firewood, charcoal, and all this. And unfortunately, though women are impacted, their voice is often silenced when it comes to policies and documents in ocean governance. So this is a slide I got from a friend who works with Plan International, and who they are doing quite a lot on climate change also because of the impact globally. So here you realize that when it comes to this picture here, the girl is carrying water. Women will have to travel far to fetch water because of the impact of climate change with rivers, and getting evaporated and cold. And then when it comes to that, safety issues may be compromised because on your way to fetch water from the river, you may experience different kinds of different forms of violence. Sometimes in some communities, they will give the child out to marriage below 18 years because like our livelihoods is impaired and then we are having challenges. So we want to reduce the feeding, the amount that we are feeding. So all these points are showing the impact of climate change on different communities. Livelihoods are also impaired. I'll show some in the presentation as we go on. And when it comes to education, and then gender and also climate change, when there's limited resources, the tendency to trade girls' education for boys is very high in most communities. So when it comes to climate change effects, education also suffer, nutrition, same, and then resilience. So this is about that. So here, climate change effects on the ocean. The ocean poses challenges to a part of the, like we saw, the ocean is very useful in terms of the livelihood, the employment and all that. Unfortunately, it also poses also challenges for people due to vulnerability. So these vulnerabilities threaten humans with loss of food, resources, and others, and they are often caused by natural hazards, but also through human-induced or anthropogenic effects. So this is it. And sorry, this is showing, okay. So Sustainable Development Goal 13, which focuses on climate change, as well as SDG 5 on gender, all talk about women empowerment. These two SDGs out of the 17 focuses on how climate change is impacting on women, children, but also globally, and then try to work on it. If we look at how the world is giving climate change attention, it attests to its relevance. COP27 talked about it extensively. Just last month, there was a conference in Ghana focusing on climate change, women and children. Just this month, Kenya was also having one. And then the whole world is actually talking about climate change. So undoubtedly, climate change adds to a new dimension to community risk and vulnerability. Current indications are that not only will flood and cyclones become more severe, but they will also occur outside their established seasons. This calls for urgent action. This is something that and Majabin 2016 are talking about, but it's something we are experiencing. If you look, Ghana, it's raining extensively now, which is not the usual time. So with this background and context established, why are we interested in having this presentation this afternoon? The issue is when it comes to coastal regions in the country, there's frequent media reports, especially in the Volta region, which talks about frequent tidal waves, flooding in the communities and its impact on the community. So based on that, we decided to have this study as part of the Ghanaian One Ocean Hub research project to look at how climate change is impacting on the communities and the resilience mechanisms, mitigation and adaptation mechanisms the communities were enacting to manage their situation. So I argue that some work has been done when it comes to climate change, but it's often done from the perspective of geography and environment, marine and ocean science, by planners and architects. But when it comes to socio-anthropological perspective, very little is done. The reason why this presentation touches on culture, but also gender, because a lot has been done on the physical elements, but not. So within this context, there are 3 research questions that are being asked. How is climate change affecting vulnerable communities? Those are in the blue ink. And what are the cultural and gender dimensions of the climate change effects on these vulnerable coastal communities? What are the mitigation and adaptation strategies available there? I'm not going to waste my time on the theories because, as I said, my time is, but I use the cultural heritage management theory and then the climate resilience theories, but I'll not touch. But the studies are ethnographic in approach. It's a case study, and it involved 3 communities from these 2 regions, one from the central region, which is often in the news because of the climate change effects, and 2 from the Volta region, specifically Keta and Salokope in these regions. The study was qualitative inclined. Interviews were conducted, photo, voice, and videos of some of the flooding in the communities were also taken. A total of 30 participants participated in this study, 10 from each of the 3 communities. Women and children were involved, but also some key stakeholders like Chief Fisherman, Konkohima, who is the queen of the fisher traders, assemblyman, and then some teachers were also done. So it was purposive, and then transcription and ethics were observed. So here we come to the findings. First issue to touch on in terms of how is climate change impacting on the communities has to do with the destruction of the structures here, because this is sort of covering the pictures a bit, so it's difficult, but when you push this away, you see broken pictures on the slide. So when it comes to the effects, it's destructing structures such as schools, such as churches, such as houses and properties, market offices. So this is a voice from one teacher who said, you know what, that already more boys attend school in this community than girls. So when the schools get flooded, parents tend to buy the books for the boys to get them back into school than the girls, while the girls are asked to help their mother's trade. So the issue is that when climate change affects the structures, the school buildings, I have pictures of school buildings that are flooded, books, wet, torn, and other things. And the community was saying that when such a thing happens, and then in the midst of limited resources, parents have to take their children back to school, the tendency to take the boys to school over the girls is very high, because the girls are also needed to help them trade in their fish and other products. So that was one thing. So this is an example of a broken wall with all the structures, and this is how close the ocean is to the houses now. They mentioned that like the ocean keeps on coming over and over. And then another woman, Davi Yawa, a 50-year-old food processor, argued, you saw the school. Sometimes the children will be in school and the waves will enter the classrooms, wet their books, and destroy everything. So they mentioned that when it comes to education, climate change was having devastating effects. And the issue is that whilst those in those coastal communities are experiencing this, their counterparts in other drylands are going to school. Sometimes they'll have to be out of school for some time, all because of this. In terms of some of the cultural challenges, the tangible and intangible cultural heritage experienced by the people, this is because of my slide, I think. So this is, the up here is an example of a shrine. And some argue that belief systems and in coastal communities is very strong. And they argue that when the flooding happens, when the tidal waves take over the community, sometimes it even washes their shrines. These are the shrines they resort to appease, to help them manage the climate change. And these very shrines are being washed away by the ocean, according to the community members. So they argued about destruction and displacement of shrines and gods, broken cemeteries. This is an example of a picture I took in the community, Zolakope. And when that happened, according to a community leader here, male 68, argued, hope you have seen all our cemeteries broken down and washed away. Now, when our children grow, how can we show them the tombs of their grandparents? Some of us have assumed the bones of our relatives for a burial elsewhere. So they argue that the flooding is also breaking down the tombs and others because it takes over the cemetery, and they have to assume bones and then remains for a barrier elsewhere. And they argue that it's quite emotional. Here they talk about the emotional attachment to that kind of thing. They also talk about lost heritage and then ancestry in the course of these engagements. And then observation of some rituals, because if this is a shrine and then we have to go and pour libation, talk to our gods, this place have been flooded, so what do we do? So they talk extensively and very passionately, if you were there to listen to them, about some of these challenges. There was also a challenge with livelihoods, threat to livelihoods. So this is typical of Ghana, women smoking their fish. So some of the men argue that, like the picture we saw earlier, where the houses are broken down, when that happens, the debris end up in the ocean. So when they cast their nets, then instead of them getting fishes, they get debris from blocks, bricks, and other things. And these are heavy. At the end of the day, it destroys their nets, according to them. That is what happens. I think I'll push this here. And then, so one said, now when we cast our net, it catches broken bricks and blocks instead of fish. While we don't get fish, it also spoils our nets. But an interesting thing has to do with the alternative livelihoods. They argue that with the men, it was very difficult for them to easily turn to other professions because of issue of identity and attachment to fishing. It's an intergenerational job. They've seen their grandparents, parents done over the years. So for them to easily shift was a bit more difficult, but the women could easily resort to trading in other products, fish products, farm products and others, but the men were more difficult. Here in Mori, in the central region, this voice also came up. They argued that with the location of the fuel dams where they buy their premix for fishing, sometimes when the flooding comes, it enters, it seeps into the tanks and then mess up with the fuel. So that means that their machines, their motors, mounted motors cannot operate with that. So there was a huge challenge with livelihood issues. There was a voice around gender and climate change also. Here, some of the women talk about how the ocean through the flooding ended up breaking their kitchen. And one woman, Auntie Manan, argued, where do I cook when my fishing pot, fireplace, and kitchen have been swept away by the ocean? And it is a recurring problem. We have reported it to the Assemblyman, the MP, Member of Parliament, and elders of the community, but there seems to be no solution. The government needs to step in, Auntie Manan argued. So they argue that the home, when it comes to the home, the kitchen is the heart of the home, and yet the flood sometimes washes their kitchen away. There's no fish to process during set times, and then they resort to other things. So these issues also came up. So in the midst of this, what is happening in terms of what are the coping mechanisms, what are the mitigation, adaptation, resilience strategies these communities are adapting? First had to do with they had enacted different levels of coping mechanism at the individual level, at the community level, at the organizational level, and then nationally the country was also doing. So individually, some, as I said, were resorting to alternative and then supplementary livelihoods. I was into fish trading. Now that the fishers are not getting fish, you resort to trading and other things. With some of the flooding, if it happens over weeks, the members also relocate to other areas. And then some of them also get family support in terms of the family taking them in, giving them food, giving them money and other things. So we saw that level of support. At the community level, some of the members, and this was also quite gendered, the women were more into it than the men. They were having microfinance support systems. So we have something called Susun, there's the spelling, where we contribute. So when we get a capital, we give it to one woman to start trading something else, and then we give it to another one, and then that can, so that was also done at the community level, and some also relocated to relatives in other parts of the country. Organizationally, we have NGOs and CSOs who help such flooded communities in such times. And then we have the National Disaster Management Committee of the country that also support them sometimes with blankets and other things during such cases of flooding. So that also came up. And then nationally, the country is erecting sea defense or sea wall and some policies, but there are a lot of politics in there as well. So this picture here is mangroves that are being, with the support of Henim Puano, one of the NGOs. And then this is also very much women-centered. The women are so much involved in the planting of the mangroves to help control the flooding in the Western region, for example. And then we have these walls also in the country, the sea defense also. But the challenge is it's not been done throughout the country. So it's been done in some parts of the country and others are not having it. So those not having often then experience the flooding because it shifts from up onto them. And there are a lot of politics and they think that because they are not part of the ruling party, they are more identified as opposition. They are not erecting this defense for them and they continue to suffer from this tidal waves and then flooding continuously. So I'm about ending. So with some of these things that we've seen, what is the implication for the community? What is the gendered implication? What is the implication for children? So we argue based on the data that what is happening is a challenge to the right of education by the children. Because when children in these coastal communities have flooding, their school broken down and others, children in other communities without such problems continue schooling. So then their right to education is threatened. Their right to safety and shelter is also threatened, because some argue that sometimes when it so happens and they are asleep, they don't know whether the ocean will come in the night and then take them away. So having that kind of sound, relaxed sleep is also a challenge. Right to survival and food security, definitely, because livelihoods are impaired, and that also has a challenge. And then the cultural rights, which we don't often hear when it comes to these things, is also challenged, because my source of worship, my source of spiritual reverence, my source of protection, and all these are challenged. So the tangible and intangible cultural heritage aspect also emerge in these studies. So the question of interest is issues of sustainability. When we're talking about blue economy, when we're talking about ocean, environment, issue of sustainability becomes so serious or so important. And if some communities have to relocate to other places, their cemeteries are being broken and all that, then where lies the issue of sustainability in terms of sustaining these communities and others? This is something for our reflection. It also calls for serious sensitization and education, environmental and climate knowledge, skills and attitude, for people to know how they are also contributing to these climate change challenges and what they can do when it comes to some of these issues. And then climate resilient livelihood. Not so this talks about the alternative and supplementary livelihoods to support them, so that they are not solely reliant on fish. Said that in the case where there are no fishes, then they are really, really handicapped. So we argue that it actually calls for multiple approaches rather than just a single approach. So I end by joining these girls with this flyer that there is no planet B, so we need to protect our planet. Girls are at the forefront of the climate change movements, and we should all come together and contribute to control the climate change challenges in the country. Thank you very much. This is where I end my presentation.
Thank you very much, Gina. And the first thing I'd like to mention is that the beautiful picture you showed at the end, I have exactly the same picture of my daughters as at the climate march here in New York a couple of years ago. So it's good to see that our girls are mobilizing everywhere. So thanks again, Gina, for sharing that really interesting case study. And I thought it was really interesting, obviously all the information you shared, but it was really interesting to hear that in terms of adapting to new livelihoods following the impacts of flooding on, for example, coastal fisheries, that women are more flexible to adapt, to resort to alternative livelihoods. So that's a strength point that I think it's important to keep in mind. But thanks again, Gina, for sharing with us this information. And of course, the Q&A will come later. So participants, please keep your questions in mind, and we'll come back to those at the end of the session. So thanks again, Gina.
Thank you.
We are now hearing the presentation from Dr. Pilile Mbata, and as I mentioned, she will talk to us about equality and equity in livelihoods in South Africa, and in particular the gender context. Pilile, you have the microphone.
Thank you so much, Valentina. I'm going to share my screen just now. Okay, hello everybody. As introduced, my name is Pilile Mbata. I'm based at the University of Cape Town, and I'm also a researcher in the One Ocean Hub. A lot of my research focuses on Southern Africa, but with a specific focus on the Western Indian Ocean coast of South Africa. And I've been working on issues around marine and coastal biodiversity governance for quite a long time, looking at issues of equity and equality, and looking at also at the integration of Indigenous knowledge in governance processes and practices, but also paying a close attention to how women are actually considered in governance processes. And this is an issue that I'm particularly interested in on the east coast of South Africa, where we have very different types of governance systems that exist on the ground, which I'll speak about. And there's a very strong sense of customary communities that exist. And that obviously does add a layer of complexity in terms of how women could be sort of included in decision-making processes around marine and coastal governance. But I'll speak about that just now. But I'm also interested in the coastal areas as well in South Africa, because these are sites of a lot of contestation between powerful actors such as the government and the private sector for resources and for blue and green economy activities that include conservation, mining, offshore oil and gas explorations, aquaculture, tourism. So all these activities usually overlap in coastal areas and also in the ocean space, and they compete for resources. And usually coastal communities that have a very long history of relying on the coast for livelihoods are usually excluded in decision-making processes, especially because a lot of these blue economy activities on the coast and in the ocean space are like quite contemporary activities that have sort of come up in the past 10 to 20 years, whereas local livelihoods that depend on coastal biodiversity and marine biodiversity have existed for a very long time. And these are also embedded within very strong customary systems that have existed for a long time. So a lot of my research looks at that contestation and also the conflicts that emerges from that, and also just better understanding how can governance processes be better designed to actually navigate these issues. So for instance, this is a map of South Africa showing marine protected areas on the coast of South Africa. So South Africa has very big targets for marine protection, which is obviously a need. We do need marine protected areas. But on the east coast of South Africa, which is the Indian Ocean coast, a lot of marine protected areas are located adjacent to areas where marginalized communities live, and where a lot of land claims where communities were previously dispossessed of their land on the coast during colonial and apartheid eras are actually in place. So there's a lot of contestation between local livelihoods and the creation of marine protected areas. So it's not to say that communities are against marine protected areas. It's just that the irony is that these marine protected areas are sort of superimposed in areas where people are trying to claim back their rights to the ocean and coastal space. And the government doesn't usually facilitate dialogue around how those conflicts could be resolved so that marine protection can happen in a way that doesn't undermine historical rights and the livelihoods of local people. And also when we look at this work around marine protected areas and the impact on the human dimensions and local livelihoods, it's usually women that are mostly vulnerable, women who live within and adjacent to marine protected areas, whose livelihoods depend on resources that are enclosed within marine protected areas. And then in South Africa, there are other processes for ocean governance that are currently ongoing. So for instance, the government is currently rolling out something known as the Oceans Economy Master Plan, which is South Africa's blue economy strategy that has identified specific sectors where the government will put a lot of attention to try and generate revenue to contribute to the GDP of the country from sectoral activities such as aquaculture, offshore oil and gas, marine transport, and others. Fisheries was initially not part of this Oceans Economy Master Plan, even though a lot of coastal communities, including women, rely on it, but it's been added more recently. But then again, you know, there's a lot of marginalization of that sector because it's competing with sectors that are associated with high economic revenues, such as mining and aquaculture and marine transport. And again, here we see voices of women not really coming through in terms of how these processes are actually rolled out and also in terms of the decision-making processes. We're also currently under the process of marine spatial planning in South Africa. Again, this is also a process where it's not clear where the voices of marginalized communities are, especially the voices of women within those communities. Okay, so I'm now going to talk about the role of women in marine and coastal governance in general. So within the wider African continent, there's a lot of, there's a lot of literature highlighting the relevance of gender in the protection of marine and terrestrial biodiversity. And this is not just important for sustainability and equity purposes, but also it's important when considering how biodiversity access, use, and governance operates in different contexts. And context is something that I'm going to highlight on throughout my presentation, because I think it's something that's important to focus on when we talk about women's rights and children's rights. It's not to say that women need the same rights all over the world. A lot of these things can depend on context. So whether you're looking at it from a global north, global south perspective, or whether you're looking at individual countries, context is really important so that we can fully understand what women need in specific contexts. And this is something that has come through in a lot of my own work. And in a lot of Africa, women are actually playing a big role in terms of producing food and caregiving to their families, and a lot of food security in coastal communities in South Africa and also in Southern Africa lies with women. And so they do contribute heavily to food security. And in the Western Indian Ocean coast, we see, especially in the areas where I work, women combine the use of marine resources or ocean resources with agriculture in order to provide food for their families. However, when it comes to benefits for marine and coastal biodiversity, a lot of evidence suggests that women and girls are really the beneficiaries of processes and practices related to access, benefit sharing, and participation at the local level. Even a lot of discourses that talk about the need to include Indigenous knowledge and recognize it, usually there's no distinct focus on women. So for example, in a lot of the areas where I work, when we're talking about including local people and integrating Indigenous knowledge, sometimes when you try to do that, which is a good thing, you end up with just voices of men within communities being included. Because in a lot of communities where I work, which are customary communities where there are a lot of patriarchal sort of structures that are in place, it is usually men that are at the forefront of decision-making at the local level that will then be considered in decision-making processes about conservation and so on and so forth. So it's really important when we talk about Indigenous knowledge and it being included to specify the need to focus on the voices of women, because if we don't do that, then women will still be left behind. Okay, and then when it comes to the linkages between gender and climate impacts in South Africa, there's a lot of research. Actually, some of my students have done a lot of research looking at climate-related impacts and how they're affecting coastal communities in different parts of South Africa. So there is increasing evidence that communities have been seeing a lot of climate-related impacts and risks over the past 30 years. And these obviously affect their livelihoods on the ground. And usually women are the most vulnerable, because a lot of households in a lot of communities where we've done surveys are actually headed by females. They're female-headed households. And usually it's much more difficult for them because of various reasons, some of which I'll speak about, to actually adapt and cope with climate-related risks and impact. So the risks that come from climate change impact can result from the interaction between hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. And these risks we've seen a lot in coastal communities that rely on fisheries for their livelihoods in South Africa. So this is an example of research conducted by one of my students focusing on a fishing community on the coast of South Africa. And these are some of the climate-related risks that the community have identified that they've sort of like been seeing over the past 30 years. So as you can see here, it's rough seas. People are perceiving that there are less fish because of changes in species distribution related to climate change, stronger winds, colder winters. And on the East Coast in South Africa, we see a lot of droughts and also a lot of flooding. So communities are aware of these impacts, but what we've also seen is that there's usually a mismatch between what governments tend to focus on in terms of climate adaptation interventions. Sometimes governments have their own ideas about what interventions are needed to help coastal communities and women within them adapt. But then what comes out from the local community is usually different. So what we've tried to do in our research is to actually see how there could be better alignments between the perceptions of local communities about how climate impacts and risks are affecting their livelihoods, and how those can be aligned with what government is perceiving to be important in terms of decision-making. So climate-related risks in coastal communities that affect women are exacerbated by other social, economic, and political factors that exist in society in South Africa. So for instance, the legacy of apartheid is still a very big issue in South Africa that creates a lot of inequity and inequality. So we see this a lot in coastal communities, like I said, especially in the advent of the blue economy and blue economy strategies, marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, all these instruments that are being used by the government and also others that involve the private sector and other powerful actors still exacerbates inequality, which was basically put in place by the apartheid era. So communities on the coast are still trying to claim back their rights that were sort of taken away from them during apartheid. But in doing so, now they have the challenge of dealing with these new processes that the government is continually introducing. So we cannot look at what the impacts are now without looking at how history has influenced that. And this basically exacerbates vulnerability of coastal communities to climate change and other factors. So there's also poor healthcare, poor infrastructure, lack of access to basic services, insecure tenure and rights, like I've spoken about. And women tend to be the ones that are mostly affected by the cumulative impact of these factors that affect livelihoods. So I think I've said a lot of this already, but I just wanted to highlight that my particular interest on the East Coast of South Africa, like I said, these are communities where there are, traditional authority systems of rule. So even where there are efforts to include local voices, it's very difficult to elicit the voices of women, because in these communities, for instance, we've had workshops, for instance, focusing on small-scale fisheries and capacity building. But every time when we invite women to these workshops, they always tell us that it's great that we're getting all the skills. But when we go back to our communities, we don't feel like we can actually use them or actually share them, because the people that attend meetings or that are included in decision-making are men. And this is just purely because some of these customary systems that exist in these communities are patriarchal by nature, and it's very difficult to sort of like change some of those structures that have existed for a very long time. But there is some progress that is being made, and I'll speak about one example to try and recognize how this actually undermines the role of women in communities. But a lot of work still needs to be done, which is why in my work I highlight that it's really important to look at these contextual issues and not just assume that if women are given rights, they will be able to access those rights, because there's a difference between giving someone a rights and having that person exercise that right. So oftentimes we see people being given rights, but they're not able to exercise those rights because of certain factors. So that's something that's really, so when it comes to biodiversity protection, conservation in these coastal communities in South Africa has created a lot of difficulty for local people, including women, to navigate their livelihoods because of the issues that I've spoken about. And obviously climate change is an additional factor. So because of apartheid, where people were forcibly removed away from land that is mostly now under conservation, where they currently live, usually they are not able to fish or to be able to engage in agriculture. So they rely a lot on government's sort of social grants to support their livelihoods, which is not actually ideal for many women at the local level. So this graph just basically shows how, in many coastal communities in South Africa in general, even though this was from one case study, this is something that we see in rural coastal areas in South Africa that rely on fisheries quite a lot, that government grants are some of the highest contributors of income because people are not able to access marine resources in a way that they used to do. So I don't think I'll have time to speak about this example because of time, but in my work, I do talk about the need. These are just some samples of work where I talk about the need to highlight the women in where I work, where we see at the local level, customary practice is starting to be more accommodating and actually of women, which is something that is pretty new because a lot of these customary structures have always been static for a long period of time, but over time they're starting to change. So for example, this is a fish trap system that is used in one of my research sites, and it's existed for close to 1,000 years. It's a customary system of fishing, but for many years it only involved the men in the community. So women could never engage in this fishing practice. They could only engage indirectly through a male figure in their family. And so if you are a woman in a female-headed household, you would not be able to benefit or access this particular fishery because it was a male sort of run and dominated fishery. But in the past 6 years, there's been a change where the first women in the community was the fishery because her husband passed away and she didn't have anyone to base. So her husband passed away and the fish trap was still there and there was no one to tend to it. But this particular woman actually petitioned to the customary committee that she knew how to construct the fish trap and she knew how to run it because she used to work with the government. So for the first time in the customary system of this area, they actually considered that women can now be part of this fishery, which was a huge turnaround, like sort of process for the community because it was never clear whether women could participate. So this is just one example, but we do see other examples in Southern Africa where we see customary systems being adaptive to change and also starting to recognize the role of women. At the international level, we also see a lot of discourse around highlighting the role of women in biodiversity governance and also in terms of accessing marine and coastal resources. But there's still a lot of work to be done and there's still a long way to go because, in terms of having that happen more effectively in many parts of the world. So just to conclude, basically, these are just my key take away messages from this particular presentation. I mean, I do have a lot, but I just wanted to highlight that the protection of the rights of women and girls does need to be highlighted in efforts to protect marine and coastal biodiversity. However, efforts that seek to recognize these rights need to consider contextual issues that keep voices of women and girls at the margins of decision-making. So it shouldn't just be talk about women and girls being included, but we also need to focus on contextual issues that need to be paid attention to in different parts of the world. And also there's, when it comes to climate change, a lot of our research shows that local people are aware of climate-related changes that affect their livelihoods, that affect their levels of vulnerability. But in South Africa, for instance, there still needs to be better alignments between what government interventions are put in place and what the needs on the ground in the communities are realized by communities in terms of helping them adapt to climate-related changes. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pilile. Thank you for sharing with us this rich information and the outcome of your work. In the interest of time, I will just move ahead to our next presenter, Dr. Boucle, excuse me, Boucle Francis. And because I can't speak right now for some reason, Boucle, please, you have the microphone.
Thank you, everyone, and greetings to all of you around the world. My name is Boucle Francis. I'm based here at Rhodes University, and the core of my work centers around women, children, climate change, adaptation, as well as livelihoods. So that's what really motivates me and attracts me. I'm trying to share my screen while I'm speaking. Yes, and I'm part of the One Ocean Hub project, which is led by Strathclyde, and I'm based at the Environmental Learning Research Center, and I'm also a lecturer at the Institute of Development Studies at NASTI, where I teach the climate change module at the disaster management program. Sorry, I'm trying to find my share screen, my presentation. Yeah. Right. Can we see my presentation?
Yes, Boucle, you might just need to launch it.
Oh, okay. Right. I hope everyone can see my presentation.
Perfect. Yes, now it's working. Thank you, Boucle.
Okay, thank you. So having heard the background of the importance of what the coastal or the ocean brings to people, I would also want to add that about 80% of verified small-scale fishers live under or near the poverty datum line. This is what the Department of Forest and the DEF said in 2018. And also we see that there are about over 400 that depend at least partially on engagement in the small-scale fishing. However, my presentation today focuses on women. I'm looking at the grandmothers of the sea protecting the seaweed and fair benefit sharing from seaweed harvesting in the face of climate change. I bring this presentation as a case study from what we have heard others speaking about. It's a study which was done in South Africa in the Eastern Cape near East London. Right there, as you can see, South Africa at the tail end, and the Pilile and others have already spoken and described the importance of the ocean. So I want to explain what Gelidium is. It is one of the several reed seaweeds that produces agar, which is a very important material within the ocean, and it provides so many properties such as food, such as dye, and many, many others. It contains a jelly that is used in many restaurants for food and cosmetics. Most importantly, it is essential in medical pathology as a neutral medium on which to culture bacteria, fungi, and sometimes viruses. There is no substitute for agar in medical research and pathology. Gelidium is one of the best species because it grows in the intergeal zone where the ocean meets the land. So it is easily collected it is found growing over the rocks and in shallow waters as well, where the sea ends between the offshore. Harvesting of seaweed is controlled by the Marine Resources Act, which is administered by the Department of Forest, Fisheries and Environment, DEF. The commercial rights to Gelidium is held, in this case, in the Eastern Cape, is held by one commercial company. And then in turn, it subcontracts a company which allows the women, who are mainly women pickers. Same pickers are used all the time in various locations, which this research project aims to contribute to protect the human rights of women who are currently trapped in a wage slavery system of seaweed harvesting for this large corporate. These women have long histories and local ecological knowledge of the ocean, which are currently being exploited with little benefit coming back to them. This is particularly distressing as South Africa is experiencing unprecedented climate emergencies such as floods, droughts, and sometimes heat waves when it's during the heat time. In this context, women who for generations have relied on the ocean as a rural safety net and food security source, not to mention site of spiritual and cultural sustenance, are now deeply threatened. This particular group of women have experienced violent human rights abuses under the apartheid regime and continue to struggle with discriminating national policies and contractual arrangements around marine resources. All this undermines their climate adaptation and requires a sophisticated and strategic response. This co-designed study aims to co-identify human rights and art-based approaches to fair benefit sharing, from seaweed harvesting for the protection of ocean-related livelihoods, culture, and climate adaptation. The project has been co-designed with these women who are artisanal fishers, drawing of work of 3 years collaboration through Coastal Justice Network, a knowledge action network of small-scale fishers, environmental justice organizations, and researchers. I would like to explain on how seaweed is harvested in South Africa, especially here in the Eastern Cape, where there are two arrangements. The first one, it involves the day trips where women would go to collect the seaweed in the ocean on a day trip. They go for the day and they return home to look after the families. However, I must stress that the trips have to take place very early in the morning, as early as 4 a.m. when the tide is still low. We understand that in this part of the world, the wave tides can actually get very, very high and dangerous. So they have to go in the morning when it's very low and calm so that they harvest the seaweed. A big haulage truck comes to the village and parks within the central point. And this truck has no contract arrangements with the people. It just park. The women would jump into the truck and go to the sea to harvest the seaweed. It will drop them at various locations within the ocean. The harvested seaweed is then put into bags and taken to the truck, which by head for 1 kilometer or more or less. And we must all understand that walking within the beach is very difficult. It's not easy. After loading the truck, they are transported back home, dropped with their harvest at the central post. Then they use the wheelbarrows to load it to Homestead. And why am I saying this? I want to bring out the work that the women they are exposed to, the conditions that they work under, and the benefits that they receive after doing such hard work. For example, you can see that she is harvesting the seaweed without protective clothing. That's a challenge already. We can see that the rocks are slippery and anything happens here, and she has no safety measures. After harvesting, you can see how much she carries the load of wet seaweed taking to the truck. It's very heavy. I can't describe it further than the photo that shows her carrying this heavy wet seaweed. And also I must stress that when seaweed is wet, it's very, very heavy. And when it's dry, it loses 10 times its weight, its size. So this is the same women going around the beach, going to drop the harvest in the truck, and while they're harvesting here, they have no lunch. Then the second arrangement, it involves women being taken away to areas which are almost 5 hours drive away. That's like 460 to 400 kilometers. In these sites, women make temporary tents out of plastics for shelter. It can be in the bush or city council camping sites. If in the city site, the buyer will pay for the cost to camp on site. To cut costs, they share tents, cook and share meals together, cooking using either firewood or paraffin stove. But the most important thing to highlight here is that while they are away, the children and all the family members that they are guardians to, they are exposed, the vulnerability increases because the guardians are not there to look for them. While also on the other hand, while they are there in the camping site, the conditions that they work under are very poor and expose them to high risk. The meals that are eaten there are not healthy at all. The process of harvesting is similar as above, which involves waking up in the morning in the campsite and going to the ocean early in the morning and returning in the afternoon. At home, it is then sun-dried. This process should take about a week under good conditions, that is, if it's not raining. Again, the truck returns to the village to fetch the women with dried seaweed to take to the company for weighing and sale. After selling, they then find their way home. At this point, the truck does not transport them back, but then they would have to find their way back home. We can see the women here at home. That is how they dry the seaweed, which they put it in the open space and is sun-dried. It's actually heavy work to do this, and it has lost a lot of weight at this point. After weighing, this is at the sell point. After weighing, each person receives their wages, but for the previous month. If you are new, you will have to wait a bit, as it takes a month for this process to go through. Currently, buying price is at R9.50 kg. Usually they take home, it ranges about 50 to 600 at a time. If you convert to the R9, it's around 50 cents a kg. There are no any other benefits. They do not have contracts. In Payslip, 50 Rand was deducted for groceries and take home was 538 Rands. There's no name of the company. I didn't put the name of the person as well. Basically, few women are harvesting to sell directly to the company, while the majority sell through the middle buyer. This is not sustainable, as this income that they realize for the heavy work that we have just witnessed, it does not sustain them. This is the second pay. I had to go through a lot of wages just to see the differences, and all it turns out to be very low and challenging. However, what is it then that we are saying about the women as they try to make a living within the ocean? We discover that there's a lot of exclusion of women. They don't take part in any decision making, as Pilile has just highlighted. And there's no consultation on terms of buying and selling price or any government programs such as the Oceans Economic Master Plan. There are poor working conditions, no growth or improvement of their lives since 1975. The company that does the seaweed buying, it was set up in 1975, and they're as old as that. Due to the loan involved, which has to be deducted from the wages, the women remain in debt, and it is difficult to free themselves from this arrangement as they work to repay the loan, and it is from hand to mouth. Seaweed is becoming scarce due to poor harvesting methods. Recently, men joined the women, creating the scramble for seaweed. This is worsening their climate change adaptation. Scrambling with men for seaweed is actually not a good idea. What about ecological survival of seaweed? This creates a lot of impact, because we understand that seaweed within the ocean, it has also other ecological benefits, such as the food for the marine life, such as fish that lives, and also as a habitat within the ocean. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Bukle, just to say you have about a minute to finish, because otherwise we'll run out of time.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So on these rocks in 2018, I slipped and fell and broke my leg. This is a woman, one of the women who has harvested seaweed for a long time. And this is another one who has harvested seaweed since 1975, but there's really no change for it. So what are the changes that we have seen from apartheid to post-apartheid? We see the clean water that was running in their taps, and now which the taps have run dry. And this is almost the same situation along the coastline. So these are some of the examples that we see. But then what are the opportunities that could be there for the women to adapt to climate change within this village? What we see here is that there are others who belong to a local cooperative which has just been given rights, though Pilile having highlighted that having the rights and exercising them is two different things. The cooperative has rights, but it is not exercising their rights. Therefore, the potential to adapt is not easy, and it is difficult. So, but we feel that, and they feel that once they have the rights and they're exercising them, they could actually relieve the challenges that these women are facing. So where is the art based? The art is drawn from the Rhodes University drama group called Mirkoko, where we are using them now and inviting policymakers and all relevant stakeholders to the dialogue. It is an ongoing work, and this work is underway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bukle, and sorry for rushing you towards the end. I just want to have some time for discussion at the end. So without wasting any more time on my part, I'm going to give the microphone to Ms. Martha Jonas to talk about the potential of social capital as transformative strategy for the climate change adaptation, case study of Namibian coastal women. Please, Martha, you have the microphone.
Thank you, Valentina.
And Martha, I will remind you when you have about 1 or 2 minutes left so that we can then move to the question and discussion, okay?
Greetings to everyone. Thank you very much. My name is Martha Jonas, and I'm a researcher on the One Ocean Hub under Transformative Governance for Sustainable and Innovative Blue Society. So I will look at the potential that social capital, let me just, okay, good. Okay. I will look at the potential that social capital as a transformative strategy for climate change adaptation, and I will look at the case study of Namibian coastal women. So I'll look at the potential that social capital have as a transformative strategy for climate change adaptation. Okay, so we will focus on, I don't have a map. Namibia is a neighbor of South Africa. We are like brother and sisters. We are in Southern Africa. So this presentation will focus on 3 questions. First of all, we look at why are women affected differently by climate change impacts. And then secondly, we answer the question, does social capital play a role in climate adaptation to enhance coastal women's participation in ocean activities? And then thirdly, we are going to look at how can social capital act as a transformative strategy for climate adaptation in ocean governance. Now, by answering the question, why are women affected differently by climate change impacts? Now, the impacts of climate change continue to burden the poorest and most vulnerable groups, which are mostly women. And this is because women depend on natural resources in comparison to men. Women are less able to cope with climate change impacts and are more exposed to the adverse effects of climate change. Now, in coastal communities, especially in the Namibian coastal communities, most of the men work as fishermen offshore, and they leave their wives and children at home for about 3 to 6 months. So you can see that these women then have to work very hard in order to bring bread on the table in the absence of their husbands, in the absence of their partners, in the absence of men. And due to their lack of qualifications, skills, and knowledge and experience, they cannot really secure formal employment. So most of them rely on marine resources. And this is because they find themselves in the coastal areas. So they just have, most of them just use the marine natural resources to survive. Now, on our right-hand side, we have a picture. This is a picture of a fisherwoman from the Hanganeni Fishing Association. I got this picture yesterday. I called one of the fishermen and I asked him if they were on site, if he can take a picture for me, for if there's any fisherwomen at the site. And his direct words were, you know what, Martha, I take off my hat for this fisherwomen because the weather is so cold and it's so rough. And I'm telling you, for a woman, it's really a challenge. So you can really see that our fisherwomen are really struggling when it comes to the change in climate due to the weather. Now, coastal-related activities have changed over time. Small-scale fishers they now have to travel long distance in order just for them to be able to have a catch. And for women especially, it becomes so difficult because one of the women have highlighted during our research that they are struggling in comparison to men because of fish that have migrated and it's now deeper, these women cannot really throw as deep as the men. So their catch is sometimes they just catch like 1 or 2. It's very difficult, but they keep saying that this is the way, this is the that's the way they have to make a livelihood, and they just need to continue pushing. However, these women now have to participate in marine resource activities, in fishing, they prefer being affiliated with the fishing association, the one we saw in the previous slide, the Hanganeni Fishing Association. And this is because they get incentives such as transport, and your fish that you catch for that particular day, you don't need to struggle, but there's a market for it. Now, these women, if they do not affiliate themselves to this particular association, it becomes so difficult in comparison to men. When during our research, we found that there's an informal group that is not affiliated to Hanganeni, but they make a living from fishing because they are men. Even if you don't have a market, you just go stand next to the road and you sell your fish. But for women, it is so difficult. So they have to depend on that association, Hanganeni. And the other thing is that, like in the previous slide, the picture that I showed you, the fishermen and fisherwomen have actually been on site for 2 weeks. So because of the distance, Hanganeni doesn't provide transport every day, but they go there and camp at the site. So just those harsh conditions and rough conditions due to climate change, due to weather that have changed, it's really, really difficult, and women are struggling. Now, there's another group of women that collect shells, and they have also complained that the quality of their shells have reduced in comparison to shell collectors inland, for example. Now, there are also shell collectors inland who also collect shells to make jewelries, but the women at the coast are saying that their jewelries from shells is seen as of low quality. So they do not make the same income like in the past before the climate change impact that they are now experiencing. So change in climate is hindering women's chances of benefiting from marine resources. So now, does social capital play a role in climate adaptation to enhance coastal women's participation? Now, trust, community participation, and relations with other community members who share the same interests influences women's receptiveness to climate adaptation. So women have actually indicated that they are coping and they are surviving due to climate change because of the relations that they share and because of the trust. For example, the small-scale fisher women from Hanganeni, they are actually arguing that the trust that they have with the association and the members of the association is what is keeping them to continue being a fisherwoman. Otherwise, they would have already quitted if it was not because of that relationship that they have with the association and other members. So community members with high social capital are willing to participate in the adaptation processes. For example, the women, the shell collectors, they say that that working together is what gives them the courage to wake up every day as a group, and you go to the coastline and you start collecting those shells. So social capital is very much important. So women, in order for women to be able to adapt, their participation highly depends on high trust in community engagement and personal relations with other women. Therefore, in order to mitigate climate change impacts, it is important to strengthen social capital as a climate change adaptation strategy. Now, during our research...
Martha, just to recall that you have about 1 minute or 2 at the most.
Okay.
Thank
you, Valentina. Several studies have found that social capital and natural resource management are interconnected. And this is because in order to participate in marine resource, especially in coastal areas, collective action is very important. Working together collectively is very, very important. It works for them because you cannot work as an individual if you want to survive in marine resource, for example, as a fisherwoman or collecting shells. If you do it alone, it's very, very difficult. So collective action is something that is very important. Women devise strategies in preparation for change by forming social networks, and these networks facilitate physical, emotional, and financial support for them. Now, norms, trustworthy, and networks tie people together. It is all about the spirit of togetherness that leads to collective action. Now, in the African content of the Ubuntu spirit really plays a big role, the togetherness, the harmony amongst people. This is very important when it comes to cognitive social capital. Okay, and we come to the last question. How can social capital act as a transformative strategy for climate adaptation in ocean governance? Now, a transformative response involves a fundamental change in technology and political regimes. Now, this requires effective strategies, one of which is strengthening the role of social capital in ocean governance. In order to promote social economic transformation and economic inclusivity in the blue economy, adaptation strategies need to incorporate issues pertaining to accessing social capital. Now, in conclusion, the researchers during our exploratory study, we found that highly bonding social capital, which is rooted in familiar relationships, such as ties with your friends, neighbors, those who are used to, those who are familiar with, made it possible for coastal women to participate in coastal activities by sharing information and rendering emotional support during change in climate. Social capital is crucial in the effectiveness of ocean governance as a mechanism that facilitates the adaptation processes. In most cases, governments react to climate change impacts by creating adaptation strategies and introducing political instruments, but they only act when it affects a large community. But in cases where, like our local fishermen, they are not really a large community, so they don't really take those strategies seriously. It's only when it affects a larger community. However, social capital is important when it comes to making the right choices and including the women in decision-making in adaptation processes. The government should make available structures and institutions where women can access information on climate change adaptation, for example, such as strengthening the Hanganeni Fishing Association for small-scale fishers. Financial facilities should be available to all women. Women should be included in finance. The government should try and finance local coastal women. Therefore, strengthening constituency development structures where coastal women can engage and build networks to improve their coping mechanism is very, very important. I come to the end of my presentation, and I end that it's very, very important for government to take take social capital as a strategy, because women are the ones that are grooming these young girls in the society. And if they are not included by really coming up with strategies that can work for the community, it will be difficult to include the girl child and women in ocean governance. Thank you very much. I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha, and sorry for hurrying you. Time
no
just
problem.
Flies away. And now, without further ado, I will let Professor Elisa Morgera do some wrap-up discussion and see if there are any questions. And apology, Elisa, that I didn't manage time all that well.
No, I think that those presentations were so rich that I'm happy we gave them more space. I'll try and maybe just connect a few dots in a couple of minutes and see if colleagues can stay on the call maybe for 5 more minutes for questions. But I think maybe the first point, and going back to the great introduction you offered, Valentina, while there is more attention internationally to gender and human rights in the context of environmental governance, we see that unfortunately in relation to women and girls' relationship with the ocean, we are lagging behind. The UN Special Rapporteur on the Environment and Human Rights, his report in 2022 only provided few examples in fisheries or in relation to coastal communities. But as we've seen from this evidence arising from the hub, there are so many critical areas where women's rights and girls' rights are at stake in the context of ocean governance, and we need to bring more attention and maybe also, I think, get the attention of specialized UN agencies that work in those areas to contribute to the work on the ground. We are aware about gender balance and gender equity issues from ocean science to then decisions on the ocean. And I think in many ways, the presentations we've heard give us so much of a finer sense of all the challenges, the needs, and the human rights that are violated for women and children in a variety of ocean-related activities, both in conservation and sustainable use. And I think as we have explored also in other panels this week, the research that really looks into women's culture and through that understands also what are the oversights in relation to women's distinctive economic and social rights at stake, and then that the knock-on effect, I think, on their political rights and their ability to influence decisions within their communities and outside is really crucial. That, the more we understand all those layers of misunderstanding, misrecognition, or even violation of those rights, the more we are able to really think about the content of a gender-responsive approach, one that can really prevent further violations of women and girls' human rights. And I think one critical point emerging from other research and literature, and that was made very clear also in the UN Special Rapporteur report, is just how direct relationship between the violation of those rights and increased gender violence. But maybe also looking forward and looking higher than this minimum level of protection. And I think also Buchle's presentation about the dire work conditions and the threats to the health of women in particular sectors that are kind of under the radar of other more prominent economic activities in the marine environment. And we see how women are often either pushed for cultural reasons or security reasons or economic pressures to work on the margins of what are considered maybe main economic sectors in ocean governance, such as fisheries. So they work on non-fish resources, other resources. But that also means that they have a very distinct system of knowledge, a very distinctive ways of being leaders, of being resilient, of creating those solidarity approaches, of pulling resources together, as Martha has also explained. And in fact, also from the research that Gina and others have conducted, they have very distinctive ways to be environmental human rights defenders and ocean defenders, really being able to find spaces and innovation while working and living in very difficult and restrictive conditions. And I think that's where I think the transformation potential lies, that moving from a gender responsive approach, which we still need to live up to and feel with that content that systematically responds to all those threats and violation of women and girls' human rights in the ocean context, to a situation where on top of that, we're able to really work towards the full realization of women and girls' human rights and really benefit in all our decision-making processes from their distinctive knowledge of the ocean, from their distinctive leadership ways and resilience ways and collaboration ways. And I think that has a potential to also transform and enhance everyone's capacity to protect the ocean to the benefit of everyone's human right to a healthy environment and a healthy ocean. So there's a lot to unpack and digest, I think, in this panel, both about those specific threats and challenges, and in some cases, documented violation of women and girls' rights in this context, but also a lot of insights into their contributions that are being marginalized or overlooked at the moment, and in some ways are even eroded and made more difficult because of those negative impacts on their human rights. And we're hoping that by raising that awareness and understanding, many can actually think in more transformative terms and come to appreciate the contributions of women and girls' rights, also in the terms of transformation. So I'll stop there and see if we can still squeeze in a few questions. I don't know if Dina, you wish to advise us on that. It's quite late already, I guess, in the day.
We are out of time. We're in a slightly exceptional situation in that we have two One Ocean Hub panels, one after the other. So the people this is affecting are also going to be in this room. maybe one question? Do we have any questions from our audience? Maybe that's a lot of pressure.